Hello, hello. Welcome back to my little corner of YouTube. Welcome aboard if you're new here. This is Book Tea with Jess, and I'm Jess, obviously. And thank you for being here. I appreciate you spending time with me today. Today's video will be focusing on my mid-month wrap-up of my Reading the Titanic TBR list. If you would like to check out the video encompassing my entire reading list, I will link it in the description and also link it at the end of the video as well. And today I will be giving a brief synopsis of each book and also my review out of a 5-star scale. I would also like to add that all the books reviewed in this video today are adult content, so 18 plus. None of these are appropriate for children, in my personal opinion, so I would not allow younger readers to take a look at these. There is some romantically explicit content in some of the books and some other content warnings that I believe that all people should take a look at before diving into some of these. I will mention it at the beginning of each book if you should take a look at the content warnings before diving in. Also, I apologize that I have not been doing weekly updates. I have Crohn's disease, and therefore I am a low energy person. So sometimes the energy is just not there to get up and record. But alas, I am here today to talk to you about what I've been up to up until this point. And here is what I've read so far. Also, I wanted to show you my awesome earrings. They are from a little shop called Femme de Bloom, and I will link them in the description below as well because there are so many cool designs on that website, including Titanic themed stuff. Very cute. So now we're getting into week 1, which was March 30th through April 5th for me. The first book that I read was Raise the Titanic by Clive Cussler. I started this out on audiobook but switched to print as there was a lot going on and I needed to be able to annotate and figure out who's doing what and different storylines, and then there was also some weird stuff. Yeah, I'll get into it. But anyway, it's historical fiction, action, and adventure. So basically, the President of the United States is getting a secret task force together to build an impenetrable defense weapon out of a rare mineral called byzanium. And this leads this secret mission group of people to an old Soviet mine where an American corpse has been discovered along with early 1900s American mining equipment, but no byzanium. The secret of a bizarre mining accident in Colorado on the other side of the world and the written ravings of a deceased man in the early 1900s lead this special task force to believe that the byzanium is on the Titanic in the cargo hold. Dirk Pitt and the government task force must face impossible odds and Russian sabotage in their quest to raise the Titanic from the ocean floor. I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. Someday I might dedicate an entire video to this book, but today I'm going to try to be as brief as possible because there's a lot here. Obviously there are a lot of historical flaws, but one must suspend disbelief going into it, and you'll have a better time with the Titanic story if you do. It was published in 1976, so a lot was not known. There was still a lot of discourse between did the Titanic crack in half, did it not, when it sank? And in the book, the Titanic is whole, resting on the bottom of the ocean. This may be a slight spoiler, but when they do get to the Titanic and they raise it, and maybe not a spoiler, because the whole entire plot revolves around this Byzanium and finding it. So obviously they're going to get the Titanic up to the surface to see if the Byzanium is even in there. So on the ship, when they do raise it, there are some bodies, and we all know because of the ecosystem that nothing is really left of the people inside and on the ocean floor. We see their shoes only because they were made out of leather, and the tanning process didn't allow the bacteria to eat them. And random morbid fact, some scientists believe that the shoes will be on the ocean floor longer than the actual Titanic itself, just because of the rust-eating bacteria that are feasting on the iron and the rate of the metal decomposition. We also know that the technology to dive the wreck was not available in the 70s. They used sonar. And in 1985, it was discovered by Robert Ballard, and in two pieces, with both of the pieces being very far apart from each other. Funny thing is, in this book, the task force is trying to stay away from the Russians and avoid their sabotage. But Robert Ballard's team actually was on a secret mission that they were trying to keep secret from the Russians, because they were looking for the USS Thresher and the USS Scorpion, which had sunk in the Atlantic. And the Navy was like, hey, I'll let you look for the Titanic if you find these subs first. So Russians all around, all the time. Back to the book's criticisms. This whole entire series is named after this guy named Dirk Pitt, and he doesn't really get a lot of page time. He's kind of like this marine archaeologist, scientist guy who's also like James Bond, who's also like John Wick. He's an interesting character. He's supposed to be a man's man. Also, unfortunately, this is one of those books where the author just didn't know how to write women, or wrote them in an intentionally malicious way. Sometimes it's hard to tell. Sometimes he just sounds ignorant. Other times his tone is super facetious. It's like, how much do you give him, slack for being 1976, and how much of it is him just being an asshole, It's hard to tell. All women in this book were overly sexualized, even just like brief encounters with waitresses and receptionists. There was a lot of emphasis on their breasts and appearances, whether they were pretty or not. Their boobs entered the room before they did, yada, 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 that type of writing. It was difficult to get through at times. Yeah. He also used the term the liberated woman a few times in an obviously negative context, and it made my skin crawl, and I was just like, I actually tabbed. I don't know if you could see the pink tabs or not, but those are all like crappy mentions of women, misogyny, and microaggressions. So if you could get through all of that and read the rest of the book, the rest of the story is pretty good, I guess you could say. On to the positives. Let's get into the positives, because I could just go on and on and on about all of that. While there were historical inaccuracies, there were also some really great scenes, especially with the Titanic being risen. The idea of raising it, sealing the holes with this mythical foam and draining it, and then towing it to New York, all the way to New York in a hurricane, was an exciting concept to explore. The logistics were crazy and inventive, and I have to give credit where credit is due, considering not much is known about the condition of the wreck, at the time that this was written. Additionally, there is a scene when Titanic finally gets to New York, and the people see her. At first it's an eerie sight. People are crying. They don't really know how to react. You're looking at a ghost ship. It's all like gray and full of muck. And there is this firefighter in the crowd that gets the crowd going, reminding them that she is finally finishing her maiden voyage and she should get the reception that she justly deserves. So I'll go ahead and I'll read that excerpt to you now, and so you can see how cool of a scene that was. It's my favorite scene out of the entire book. Many of the watchers wept openly. Among them were 3 of the passengers who had survived the tragic night so long ago. The air seemed heavy and hard to breathe. Most people, describing their feelings later, were surprised to recall nothing but an odd sense of numbness, as though they had been temporarily paralyzed and struck dumb. Most, that is, except for a rugged fireman by the name of Arthur Mooney. Mooney was the captain of the New York Harbor fireboats, a big, mischief-eyed Irishman born of the city and seagoing fire eater for 19 years. He slammed a massive fist against the binnacle and shook off the spell. Then he shouted to his crew, "Up off your asses, boys. You're not department store dummies." His voice carried into every corner of the boat. Mooney hardly ever required the services of a bullhorn. "This here's a ship arrivin' on her maiden voyage, ain't she? Then let's show her a good old-fashioned traditional New York welcome." "But Skipper," a crew member protested, "it's not like she's the QE2 or the Normandy coming up the channel for the first time. That thing is nothing but a wasted hulk, a ship of the dead." "Wasted hulk your ass," Mooney shouted. "That ship you see there is the most famous liner of all time. So she's a little dilapidated, and she's arriving a tad late. So who gives a damn? Turn on the hoses and hit the siren." Titanic's raising all over again, but on a much grander scale, as the water spouted in great sheets over Mooney's fireboat and his boat whistle reverberated off the city's skyscrapers. Another fireboat followed his example, and another. Then whistles on docked freighters began to scream. Then the horns of cars lined up along the shores of New Jersey, Manhattan, and Brooklyn, joining the outpouring of noise followed by the cheers and yells from a million throats. What had begun with the insignificant shrill of a single whistle now built and built until it was thunderous bedlam of sound that shook the ground and rattled every window in the city. It was a moment that echoed across every ocean of the world. The Titanic had made port. So this scene by itself made this book a 3 out of 5 stars for me. It was going to be a 2. It was almost a 2, but this scene was so impactful that I ended up giving it a much higher scale. The next book is The Deep by Alma Katsu. This is historical fiction and horror. Please check the content warnings before diving into this one, as there are many themes beyond just the tragedy itself that could be upsetting to some. So the author makes those clear in the first few pages of the book. So if you need to take a look at that before you purchase it, I would definitely do so. Annie Hebley, our main female protagonist, is a stewardess on the maiden voyage of our dear Titanic. She is assigned to a block of rooms in the first class where she is waiting upon the likes of John Jacob Astor and his very young and pregnant wife, Madeline. Annie also meets a couple named Carolyn and Mark Fletcher, who have a baby daughter named Ondine. Annie feels connected to this family somehow in a strange, preternatural, or maybe even supernatural sort of way. She feels deeply protective over Ondine, and she doesn't really know why. And she also feels something sinister and creepy going on this boat. Something is haunting the ship, and several unexplainable deaths occur. An eerie singing is heard from the ocean, and that is right before a little boy has a seizure and passes. Madeline Astor is convinced that whatever supernatural is going on the boat has something to do with the little boy's death, and she feels responsible for him because he was employed with her as a dog walker and came with her and her servants. So to find answers as to what happened, she pairs up with a an occultist who's also a newspaper owner or writer, I think he is. And they do a seance to figure out what's going on. Fast forward to 4 years later, and Annie is boarding the Britannic to be employed as a nurse. And at the urging of her friend, who is also a former stewardess on the Titanic, she's like, hey, get on this boat. Maybe it'll make you, feel better. Annie does not have any memories of her life before the tragedy, and memories of the Titanic are kind of fuzzy as she survived the icy water. Annie again meets Mark, now a wounded shoulder, on the Britannic, and a strange supernatural happenings start again. We all know from history that this ship is doomed as well. I give this book 5 out of 5 stars, which might be surprising to many who have read it. There were a lot of mixed reviews about it. People did not like the non-linear timeline, and it was kind of too disjointed for them. But for me, I felt like with every jump in time, we were closer to solving the mystery. There were little elements back and forth that you're kind of piecing together the puzzle and figuring out what the supernatural dealings were. The disjointedness, to me, felt intentional. As, Annie, she doesn't have a very good memory of her life before the Titanic. And then also, when she boarded the Britannic, she doesn't remember very much about her time on the Titanic as well. She remembers some major events, but other things are really hazy. And she seems to have memory loss and signs of PTSD. And, things are going to be bumpy when you are going through those things. So it felt very purposeful for the book to be the way that it was laid out. In regards to the spookiness, I felt like the story started as slightly eerie and then got more dark as time went on, and I appreciated that. It was a slow burn and not a jump scare type of book. There were no moments in the book where the ghosts just pop out and go boo, which may have disappointed some, according to the reviews, but it didn't bother me. This book also had some LGBTQ plus representation in the side characters, which was surprising because of the timeline, but it was nice. I appreciated the representation. The characters are also very human, very flawed, which added 2 elements of the mystery and the story. I also really liked the addition of Celtic mythology elements and the occultism. This was the first time I've ever read a novel involving a supernatural love triangle. Spoiler-ish, but not really, because you don't know who it is yet. Love Square, maybe, because it involves a ghost, which was fascinating, very interesting. I thought that part of the storyline was very unique. In regards to history, when reading this book, I could tell that a lot of love and care was put into the historical events, and there was a lot of research behind the actual details of the sinking itself. It read like a passion project, and I felt that passion on the page. So yeah, on to the next one. This next one is One Night to Remember by Kristen Miller. This is historical fiction and erotica smut. So this book has 2 open-door explicit romance scenes, so do proceed with caution if that's something that bothers you. And Elizabeth Scott is a clothing designer sailing first class while she is enjoying the luxury of the ship. She doesn't feel like she belongs with the upper echelon. She grew up poor but now has a thriving business. In contrast to her current station, she has sticky fingers and pockets some silverware at dinner, and also lifts a pocketbook from the person that she is dining with at dinner, and it has cash in it as well. Thomas McGuire is an officer of the ship and notices Elizabeth, first for her beauty and then for her pilfering. He detains her, and takes her to his quarters, of all places, instead of directly to the quartermaster, and informs her that he is to retrieve the Master of Arms and bring him to his room. Elizabeth explains to Thomas that she was taking from the rich to give to a third-class family so that they may have a better future in America. Thomas witnessed this exchange in third class when he was following her to see what she was doing with the pilfered items. And while empathetic, she has still committed a crime, unfortunately. Elizabeth and Thomas, while discussing her situation, are all of a sudden infatuated with each other and have a tryst in Thomas's cabin. The handcuff stand, which could have been hot if written correctly, but the power dynamics at play were like kind of icky. And he decides to let her go after the exchange. And they do meet up again later. When the ship starts to sink, Elizabeth makes it to a lifeboat. We don't know what becomes of Thomas until the very end. I give this 3 out of 5 stars. Why did Elizabeth need to steal? If she's already a first-class passenger, she's making all this money. She could have just given money to that family if she was feeling like they needed something. And, especially if she could afford passage in first class and is a successful businesswoman. And then Thomas, he abandoned his honor and morals so quickly for a young, blonde, hot thing, which was like, okay, you just gave that up. Flip a switch. And then the book was also super insta-love, which isn't always bad, but like you're in love with this person after a few hours and they become the love of your life automatically. But, it was a smutty little romp, and it might be fun for people. So I feel like a lot of people will, appreciate that. Also, to give credit where credit is due, the author was historically accurate in the events of the sinking, and you could tell that they were a Titanic enthusiast and really knew, what was going on. So I did appreciate that as well. The fourth book that I read that week is A Night to Remember by Walter Lord. This is a very well-known book, and I'm surprised I haven't read it yet, to be completely honest. It is available on KU, and the sequel to it is also available on KU as well. It is nonfiction, not to be confused with the previous title, which is One Night to Remember, the smutty book. Very different books altogether. And this is a collection of accounts of survivors. Lord has pieced together one of the most well-respected narratives of the Titanic disaster ever written, and it's a true minute-to-minute timeline and includes a complete list of those on board and those who perished. There are detailed diagrams and illustrations, and the author included accounts of all classes, not just first class, and I really appreciated that. His writing style drew me in, and I never felt like I had to slog through anything, which is, sometimes that happens to me when I read a nonfiction book. Sometimes I have to really focus and move my way through it. But the narration was seamless. I didn't have any trouble getting through it at all. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It was factually accurate and beautifully written. It included, different people's perspectives. Some people said that it broke in half. Some people said that it stayed intact. And it was a beautiful and respectful homage to the tragedy and those who perished, and also very respectful to the survivors. And as a side note, a 1958 movie by the same name is considered one of the most factually accurate Titanic movies ever made, as it follows the narrative of the book, and except for the splitting of the ship. They didn't do the splitting of the ship in the movie. I recommend giving it a go because it is in my top 3 Titanic movies. It's very good. Now we are on to week 2, and this was April 6th through April 12th. And the first book of this week was On the Edge of Daylight by Giselle Beaumont. This is a historical romance novel, and please check content warnings before the beginning of the book, as not only, the tragedy, but there are explicit scenes and then other content that people may find uncomfortable to read through. This is a reimagining of the events of the Titanic from the points of view of Esther Bailey, the first female officer for White Star Line, and Wyndham Murdoch, inspired by the real-life William Murdoch. Esther is assigned to Wyndham as his mentee during the first voyage, and her arrival is met with criticism, as she is a woman, from her fellow officers and Captain Smith. Some are lukewarm towards her, some are outright just outraged that she is female and she is an officer, and they think it's just disrespectful to them and their stations. And she almost does not set sail with Titanic after a tailor turns her away after her request for uniforms, as she is a woman and the tailor does not believe that she could be an officer and does not want to measure her at all for anything. Murdoch reluctantly comes to the rescue at the request of her brother, who is also going to be sailing on the ship, studying shipbuilding under Thomas Andrews. And Murdoch, he comes in and he straight up says, "Hey man, I need new gloves, and that's an officer over there and she needs her uniforms, like, today." They butt heads constantly on the ship and really grind each other's gears. But with that tension comes fascination. And they start to secretly pine for each other. They also start to wonder what matters to them most, their careers or their feelings. I gave this 5 stars. The back and forth between them almost became tedious at the beginning, but the ending was so tragically beautiful. So tragically beautiful. Oh my God. That it saved the whole thing. There are also scenes in the story that kind of emulate the feeling of certain scenes in James Cameron's Titanic, and you can tell that the author really loved that movie, and that there was inspiration in the novel based on the film, which she mentions either in the foreword or the afterword. I don't remember which one, but she was definitely impacted by the movie. I cried a lot at the end. I cried so much. It was gorgeous. It was probably the saddest out of all the fiction stories that I've read up until the mid-month point. And this book's going to live rent-free forever in my brain. It was beautiful. And everybody should read it if you're into romance. Obviously it's not historically accurate because there were no female officers on the Titanic, but if you wanted to reimagine that type of scenario, the story was just pulled off flawlessly, in my opinion. The next book that I read that week is another nonfiction book. It was called The 10 Best Titanic Survivor Stories by Jonathan Reeve. It's a nonfiction collection of accounts from the passengers on the night of the sinking. And instead of telling it in like a long narrative, each survivor's story is broken up by each person. So it kind of tells the story over and over again, but from different perspectives. The accounts include stories of survival from all of the classes, but first class is definitely represented the most. It was a mixture of letters to newspapers, book excerpts, and inquiry transcripts from the inquiry that happened after the sinking. It was very interesting to see the different passenger perspectives, a lot of them in their own firsthand accounts and their own words. Some of the passengers say that the ship broke apart. Others believe that it didn't. Again, some say there were explosions and fireballs, and there was just so much mist after the Titanic sank, my favorite story was The Inquiry with Baker Charles Wahin. Yahin? I think that's how you pronounce it. He was the drunk baker. He drank so much the night of the sinking that he avoided hypothermia despite being in the water for an extended period of time. And his story is told in The Inquiry. He's just so calm and collected. He was like, yeah, I drank, and then I did some stuff, and then I drank some more, and then I did some stuff. And they're like, do you remember this? And he's like, no. It was fun. I give this a 4 out of 5 stars. The first story was so long in comparison to the other accounts. It was Archibald Gracie's account, and it was an excerpt from his book. And whew, he is gratuitous and superfluous with his language. He was very much a first-class dude. And those chapters could have been, condensed and paraphrased a little bit more, because getting through his was kind of a slog, and it was the first story of the book. So I was like, bro. Apparently he wrote an entire book on the sinking, and I don't think I would ever be able to get through that, because his writing is a little cray-cray with how wordy it is. And then the third book from this week, and the final book for the mid-month wrap-up, is going to be Blood and Salt by Hubert L. Mullins. This is historical fiction and horror. And the story starts with 2 workers on the Titanic who discover a large crate in the cargo hold from a British museum. The crate is labeled the First King of Ulster. And that is an ancient province of Northern Ireland, from what I have looked up on the interwebs. They intend to pilfer small valuables and get off in Queenstown to sell them. And instead discover what looks to be a mummified, petrified body with a stake through his heart. One of the men pulls the wooden stake made of yew from the chest to check for rings on the hands to see if they can still, get something out of all of this effort. And as soon as they pull out the stake, the body just turns into this black mist and rises up from the crate and basically attacks the guy who removes the stake and imbibes him. The other worker escapes the ship dressed as a mailman and hides in a mail cart, and we never hear from him again. Enter another character. This is Ben York. He's a doctor that is working on the Titanic as a means to an end for a sad career. He was working with children in a tuberculosis hospital, and he is going to the States to start a new life because his life has been so sad so far. Ben meets a woman in third class named Fiona Lynch and her son Reed. Reed drops his father's cross off the gangplank, going up to get his, medical examination along with his mother before getting onto the ship. And, Ben remembers this, and he buys him a new replacement cross, and he learns that he's nonverbal due to a traumatic incident in his past, and he gets real close to this family. The Vampire King, and I cannot pronounce his name because it is Irish, and I think it's Apertok. I'm going to put it up on the screen for you so you can look at it. Starts changing passengers to be a part of his coterie. One of those passengers is Fiona's cabin neighbor, Matilda. Ben gets close to Fiona as they try to figure out what has happened. More passengers get turned into vampires. The doctors are stumped as to what is happening because this can't be real. And Reed, being the avid reader that he is, because he can understand language, he can read language, he's just, he can't speak due to his past. He gives Ben the novel Bram Stoker's Dracula and is like, hey, look at this book. And then Ben's like, oh, really? And Reed's like, yes, because something happens to Reed and Matilda's son. They go on a journey in the hallway, and then they see the vampire people, and Reed narrowly escapes, but his friend does not. I really enjoyed this book. I think despite the adding vampires to the story of the Titanic, I feel like a lot of the writing was still very respectful to the story, and I think the author did a great job with this. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars because I did really enjoy it. You could tell that the author had passion for the Titanic and used great resources to put all of the facts of the story together. I love the Irish vampire mythology. I love all the references to Bram Stoker's Dracula. We're a Dracula girl over here. And the ending was a little much for me, and this is a slight spoiler, but I wish that the vampire shenanigans had been resolved before the sinking of the ship, because it was all just a little bit too much for me, everything going on all at once. And but otherwise it was a really solid book, and the very end of it was sweet and satisfying, for our characters, our main characters. Obviously the tragedy still happened, but our main characters had a nice happy ending, so that's always good. So yeah, that's my mid-month wrap up. Sorry I didn't do, weekly updates like I intended to. One of these days, we'll make it happen. But yeah, so stick around. I'll probably be posting the rest of my reading adventure, first week of May. I would say I'm still making my way through a lot of books. I'll probably get through most of the list that I have on my Titanic TBR that you can take a look at in the video that I'll be posting at the end. Also, if you haven't watched the National Geographic documentary on the new Titanic scans that they did in 2022 and pieced all together, go ahead and watch that. It's on Hulu. It was very, very interesting. It was a little disappointing in the fact that they didn't do more in-depth look at the scans. It was kind of like a real brief overview over it. But Magellan has produced a video game that you can get through Steam that I've downloaded the early access to. And you can find objectives on the wreck using the scans that they had put together. VROV Pilot Titanic. That's what it's called on Steam. And it doesn't have any other platforms yet, just Steam. I have been playing early access, and it has been super fascinating. And it's weird to play through something that's so gamified. I hope that they go ahead and put in a feature where you can just do exploration mode, so you can just take a look at things and mosey around. As of right now, it has like a timer and you have to find certain objectives, but I hope that they add that feature in the future. So yeah, anyway, have a beautiful, wonderful day. I hope you are well. I hope your family is well. Please take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye-bye.